Welcome to the deep dive. Have you ever really stopped to think, what's the actual point of education? Is it just, filling our heads with facts, or is it something deeper, something that shapes how we see ourselves, our potential, our place in the world?
It's a fundamental question.
Especially for our Lion's Den fam listeners, right? We're always talking about empowerment, self-determination, building our community. This really gets to the heart of, well, how we gain power.
Absolutely, and that's why today's topic is so crucial.
Exactly. Today we're doing a deep dive into a book that, honestly, even though it's almost 100 years old, feels startlingly relevant. It's Carter G. Woodson's The Miseducation of the Negro.
It really is a foundational text,
Yep.
published way back in 1933. And you're spot on, it's not just some dusty historical document.
Not at all.
Woodson's work is this incredibly powerful critique. It looks at how education can be used, and often was used, not to liberate people, but actually as a tool for control. Subtle, but powerful.
That's it, exactly. The version we've been digging into is the original 1933 Associated Publishers one.
Right.
We should mention there are some tiny edits, for things like capitalization, making it a bit more modern. But the core message, whoa, it's just as raw and impactful today.
The essence is completely untouched.
So our mission here is to really unpack Woodson's main argument. He says the education given to Black people historically was basically designed to control how they thought and what they did.
That's a heavy claim.
It is.
Yeah.
And we want to explore how that legacy might still be affecting things today, like self-development, economic empowerment, political voice.
Yeah.
Especially for building strong communities from the inside out.
And it's not just about history, is it? It's about understanding how information itself gets, framed, how it can be used to serve someone else's agenda, rather than truly educating someone to think for themselves.
To innovate.
To innovate, exactly, and to do for themselves. It really challenges what we even mean by being educated.
Okay, so let's really get into this core argument, because this is where Woodson just lays down the gauntlet. He talks about miseducation versus true education.
Right.
And his fundamental idea, it's something we should all maybe keep in mind, the mere imparting of information is not education.
That stops you in your tracks, doesn't it?
It does, because we often think, okay, more facts, more data, that equals education. But Woodson's saying, hold on a minute. What's the real difference he's drawing?
Well, that's the crucial thing. For Woodson, true education empowers someone to think and do for himself. It's about building that internal capacity, right? Real agency.
Right.
Being able to chart your own course.
So it's not just knowing stuff, but what you do with it.
Exactly, and who you do it for.
Yeah.
He contrasts that sharply with the system he saw, which he argued was deliberately set up to make Black individuals, often without even realizing it, unconsciously contribute to their own undoing, basically propping up the very system that oppressed them. It's a chilling idea, suggesting this kind of psychological shaping happening right under the surface of teaching, like being a parrot versus being a philosopher, as you said.
And this is where it gets really deep and kind of disturbing, the psychological manipulation part. Woodson says, look, if you can control how a person thinks, you don't really need to worry about their actions.
You don't need chains.
Exactly. No direct orders, no physical walls. He says that person will find their proper place and just stay there. They won't even need to be told to use the back door.
They'll just go.
They'll go without being told. And get this, he says if there isn't a back door, their education is so effective, they'll actually cut one for themselves.
That's terrifying. The idea that education itself could lead to self-imposed limits, self-sabotage even.
All just to stay in that so-called proper place. It turns the whole idea of enlightenment on its head.
It does. It's subtle control, but incredibly powerful. And Woodson shows how this wasn't just random. It was embedded in the curriculum itself. The stories told, and maybe even more importantly, the stories left out.
Right.
He talks about how schools, even integrated ones, taught Black students to admire the Hebrew, the Greek, the Latin, and the Teuton, and to despise the African.
So actively teaching self-contempt.
Yes. Imagine being a kid and learning systematically that your own heritage, your ancestors, maybe even how you look, is inferior. While constantly glorifying others, it's a direct hit on your identity.
It's like psychological warfare through textbooks, and the stats he gives are just staggering. Only 18 out of hundreds of Negro high schools at the time even taught Negro history.
And even then, often framed as a problem. Not a history, not a culture, but an issue.
Unbelievable. He tells that story about the Black PhD who refused to teach a course on the Negro, saying he knew nothing about the Negro and didn't waste his time that way in school.
Yeah, that says it all, doesn't it? how deeply this miseducation could take root, even at the highest academic levels. You're educated away from yourself.
So the very process meant to uplift actually crushed potential.
Precisely. Woodson says it stimulates the oppressor while it depresses and crushes the spark of genius in the Negro. It instills this feeling that your own people don't amount to much.
Leading to what he called a hopeless liability, trained to consume, follow, admire, but not create or lead for themselves.
Exactly.
So, practically speaking, what did this look like day to day? Woodson gives some really concrete, almost mundane examples that really hit home.
He does, like educated Negroes, choosing to buy groceries from a white grocer because they had somehow absorbed the idea that the Negro is not clean.
Even if it went against their own community's economic interest, it wasn't logical.
No, it was internalized bias. He also saw them hesitant to support black businesses because their economics professors, usually white, taught them black people cannot operate effectively in business or industry.
Wow. And even in church. Seeking righteousness in church is controlled by the oppressors, even if it meant accepting segregation within those churches.
Yes, accepting Jim Crowism right there in a place of worship.
Yeah.
It shows how deep the miseducation went, affecting every part of life.
Which leads to that paradox he talks about, the desire for equality, meaning wanting everything the white man has, even if it is harmful.
Right, this drive for nominal equality. Just imitating on the surface rather than building something authentic and genuinely empowering. It meant dismissing black originality.
But he's careful here, right? He wasn't arguing for just separate schools for separation's sake.
No, absolutely not. That's a common misunderstanding. He was pushing for common-sense schools and teachers who understand and continue in sympathy with those whom they instruct.
So education, that's relevant, connected.
Exactly. Culturally relevant, empowering, rooted in the students' own lives and history. Education, he believes, should inspire people to live more abundantly, starting with life as they find it and figuring out how to make it better.
Building from within, not just blindly copying something designed for someone else.
Precisely. Critically thinking about what you're adopting.
Okay, so that brings us to the history. How did this whole system of miseducation get so entrenched? Woodson traces it right back to the period just after emancipation.
Yeah, a time of immense hope, but also huge challenges.
He points out that the push to educate freedmen came mostly from northern philanthropy missionary groups, well-meaning individuals, and the government to some extent. But here's the catch.
The hidden agenda.
Sort of. The goal often wasn't about developing black people as truly free, self-determining individuals. It was more about transforming them.
Molding them into a certain image.
Right, an image that fit the existing social order, rather than empowering them to define their own future.
That's a critical distinction.
Yeah.
You had these missionary teachers coming south, full of enthusiasm, often genuinely wanting to help. But Woodson says they had more enthusiasm than knowledge, meaning they brought their own biases and used the standard traditional curricula of the times, which, as Woodson puts it, did not take the Negro into consideration except to condemn or pity him.
So even with good intentions, they ended up reinforcing negative stereotypes.
Exactly. They ignored the heritage, the contributions, the unique genius of the very people they were trying to teach. The curriculum was just completely disconnected from their students' reality.
And you see it in the actual textbooks. Geography showing races on a ladder, Caucasians top, Negroes bottom.
A visual lesson in inferiority.
And just completely omitting African contributions to history, culture, everything.
Everything. Language teaching mocked Negro dialect instead of studying its linguistic roots. Fine arts ignored the African influence on Greek art, which scholars were already starting to recognize.
Wow. Even law and medicine.
Oh, absolutely. Law students were taught they belonged to the most criminal element, that the law had a double standard, basically upholding discriminatory court decisions. Medical students were told they were inherently germ carriers, prone to white diseases, while their known immunities to other diseases were downplayed.
It's like they were being systematically disarmed before they even started their professions.
It really was. And history. Woodson says the Negro literally had no place in the curriculum, except as this lower-order human, useful only as labor.
Africa just mentioned as the dark continent.
If mentioned at all. Students wouldn't learn about Africans domesticating animals first, or developing trial by jury, or pioneering ironwork. They wouldn't hear about sophisticated empires like Songhai.
So this constant erasure just cemented the idea of inferiority, starved identity.
Completely. So in this vacuum, this big debate started among black leaders. classical education versus industrial education, humanities versus trades.
The big quarrel, as he called it. But it sounds like it was kind of a false choice.
Woodson argues it was. Neither path, as implemented, really equipped black people for the reality they faced.
How so? What was wrong with classical education?
Well, it trained people in literature, philosophy, politics, but they often couldn't apply that knowledge in the segregated society they lived in. It created malcontents, he said. People who saw the impossibility of success under those conditions.
Frustrated intellectuals.
Right. He even notes that many brilliant black thinkers and artists, like Roland Hayes or Henry O. Tanner, had to leave the U.S. to truly flourish, to escape the stifling traditions and recover from their American education.
So it pushed genius out instead of fostering it for change within.
Exactly. And industrial education wasn't the magic bullet either.
Why not? That sounds practical.
Often it taught outdated methods. The schools lacked the modern equipment that white apprentices got in actual factories, so graduates weren't really prepared for modern industry.
And even if they were trained?
They were often blocked, generally barred from higher pursuits by trades unions. The powerful white unions kept them out of skilled jobs.
So, trapped again.
Right. The tragic result, Woodson shows, is that neither system really worked. Neither produced people truly equipped to face the ordeal before them. In fact, the number of skilled black laborers actually went down after the Civil War.
Declined, despite all the focus on industrial training. That's shocking.
It is. And it just drives home Woodson's main point. Educational systems designed without understanding the specific needs and context of the people they're supposed to serve are doomed to fail. They become counterproductive.
A square peg in a round hole, like you said. And maybe intentionally so. This miseducation then had these ripple effects. Devastating consequences across the board, especially economically. Woodson's ultimate critique here is harsh. Educated Negroes learn little as to making a living.
Which he calls the first essential in civilization. It wasn't just about individuals failing. It undercut the whole community's economic health.
He gives those specific anecdotes that are just, wow, they really illustrate the disconnect.
They do. Like the college student shining shoes to pay tuition. Great work ethic. But despite handling leather every day, he never thought to study leather production or the shoe business itself.
His education pointed him away from that practical opportunity.
Right. Trained him to polish shoes, not make them or sell them innovatively. Or the mechanic's son, whose father had real skills. The son goes to college but doesn't study engineering to build on his dad's trade, modernize it, expand it.
Educated away from his own foundation.
Exactly. And the washerwoman's daughter. Educated, yes, but taught to look down on her mother's hard work instead of seeing it as a potential business.
She could have used chemistry, business skills.
To create a modern laundry. But that thought wasn't encouraged. Woodson contrasts this with a white professor who actually did start a successful laundry, serving the black community, something the educated Negro might have seen as beneath them.
So the pattern was, ignore the opportunities right in front of you within your community, chase opportunities elsewhere, often unsuccessfully.
A tragic misdirection of talent and energy. And it led to this really distorted business sense among the educated.
How so?
A deep reluctance to invest in or even patronize black businesses. They genuinely believed, based on what they learned in school from white professors, that black people just cannot succeed in business.
While at the same time,
the uneducated black entrepreneur was often out there doing the impossible, starting businesses, providing services, but desperately needing capital and support from the very educated class that looked down on them.
And Woodson mentions the problem of miseducated employees, too.
Yeah, they could be a heavy burden on these fragile black businesses. They had degrees, but maybe lacked practical skills, wanted guaranteed salaries right away instead of, working on commission or having sweat equity in a startup. Less entrepreneurial spirit.
Which contributed to failures, like the insurance companies he mentioned. Only 1 in 15 succeeding.
Right. It wasn't a lack of need. It was internal weaknesses, often stemming from this miseducation. And that fatal tendency to duplicate effort. Too many small, struggling banks or businesses competing instead of merging for strength.
That's where his call for collective action comes in strongly.
Absolutely. He basically says, if the highly educated could just forget the useless theories, see through the propaganda, fall in love with their own people, and sacrifice for them, many problems could be solved.
It's a call to reinvest talent and capital back into the community.
A powerful call for internal focus. And this disconnect wasn't just economic. Woodson describes a similar social split. The educated Negro leaves the masses.
Even though he saw the black church as a huge asset.
Exactly. He called it the great asset of the race, a source of capital, a community forum, a support system for professionals, a real powerhouse.
Yet the more educated people became,
The less comfort they seemed to find there.
Yeah.
This led to what he called the talented 10th desertion, turning Du Bois' idea on its head.
So the educated elite, meant to lift the race, were actually leaving the core institutions.
Right, they'd come back from college, forever lost to the popular Negro churches, seeking out more intellectual or fashionable churches, often mimicking white ones, that crucially do not touch the masses.
They disconnected themselves.
And Woodson's just scathing about this. He asks, how an educated Negro can thus leave the church of his people and accept such defasure? Jim Crowism has always been a puzzle. He cannot be a thinking man.
He calls it slave psychology, accepting inferiority even in sacred spaces.
Yes, and this desertion meant a shift away from community uplift. Instead of preparing to serve, the focus became just memorizing facts to get a personal job, individual gain over collective progress.
He contrasts that sharply with how educated whites often supported their own struggling communities.
A painful contrast. The educated Negro often abandoned the undeveloped Negro. He also criticizes the foreign theology doctrines imported without adapting them to black experience, leading to fragmentation. Hundreds of denominations, too many officials, wasteful duplication.
And ministers preaching irrelevant stuff.
Dead languages and dead issues, he says, instead of addressing real-life problems and offering relevant spiritual guidance.
It's interesting he contrasts the uneducated minister here.
Yeah, he suggests that sometimes the minister without formal training actually understood the people better, had more empathy, and could solve real social problems more effectively than the miseducated one speaking theory to empty pews. It highlights the value of connection and lived experience.
He also doesn't shy away from corruption within the church.
No, he calls it a free field for incompetence and undesirables, exploiting people's faith. He gives that awful example of the railroad man turned preacher just to fund his gambling.
And he notes the historical origins of some worship styles learned from early white evangelicals, contrasting it with more reserved traditions elsewhere, pointing out hypocrisy, too.
Right, reinforcing that this miseducation was part of a larger system.
And then politically, the consequences there were just as severe and maybe even more calculated.
Absolutely deliberate, Woodson argues. Political education for black children was actively suppressed.
Why?
Fear. Fear that if they truly understood things like the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, they might actually contend for the rights therein guaranteed. It was political disarmament.
Part of that strategy of keeping the Negro in his place?
Exactly. History was rewritten, twisted to justify inferiority. And this warped view infected everyone, even Northern historians, even some black lawyers.
It comes back to that core idea.
If you can control a man's thinking, you do not have to worry about his action. That's why, he says, so many educated Negroes just stayed silent on politics, or even discouraged activism. They were taught to fear upsetting the peace, even if that peace was built on terror.
Which led to practical disenfranchisement, literacy tests, poll taxes.
All designed and applied specifically to exclude black voters, reducing their numbers drastically. It wasn't about ensuring an educated voter base.
He points out the hypocrisy intelligent black people denied, while ignorant whites were allowed.
Precisely. It was purely about racial control. And this political powerlessness bred corruption within the black community itself.
How so?
Political involvement got restricted to, well, shady deals. Controlling delegates for cash, accepting token Jim Crow jobs with no real power.
And even prominent leaders got caught up in this.
Sadly, yes. Abandoning important work to rally votes for white candidates who just ignore them later. Northern political bosses used black leaders for campaigns without truly empowering them, moving from offering drinks to these meaningless jobs.
Just keeping them dependent and on the sidelines.
A cycle of tokenism. And even when black officials did get elected, Woodson notes a lack of vision.
Focused only on Negro issues.
Often, yes. Important issues like lynching, segregation, of course. But they often didn't engage with broader legislative matters like their Reconstruction-era predecessors did. Those earlier leaders fought for things like public education and labor rights for everyone.
So, a shrinking of political imagination directly linked to the miseducation.
That's his argument, which leads to this devastating concept he calls the loss of vision.
A moral surrender.
Yes. He contrasts 18th century enslaved people who still demanded equality, who asserted their humanity, with 20th century educated Negroes saying they do not want social equality, content with being menials or accepting segregation.
That quote comparing "I am a man" to "I am a colored man, you white folks settle that" is brutal.
It shows a devastating retreat from claiming full humanity and agency. And this acceptance of segregation, Woodson says, was widespread among the educated. They even became its fearless champions.
Without seeing it as just slavery part two.
Exactly. They saw it as an opiate, temporary relief from struggle, a false peace, not a cure for the disease of inequality. It was this pattern of inconsistency demand rights one day, accept segregated schools the next.
Trading long-term freedom for short-term advantage.
Constantly compromising. And this, he argues, became a self-inflicted handicap. Feeling hopeless, some educated Negroes started exploiting their own people.
Like joining with shady real estate dealers.
Yes, keeping people in bad housing for high rent. Or ministers starting new churches just to exploit the unthinking masses financially, deepening the community's problems out of a sense of futility.
He warns of a crisis, right? Economic extermination.
He does. He saw that these highly educated people with no initiative who exploited their own would be displaced as the economy changed. The world wouldn't need the factotum or scullion forever.
Without innovation, self-sufficiency, the future looked bleak.
His conclusion is blunt. The educated Negro shows no evidence of vision. They needed to see a new path rise in production, become manufacturers, merchants, or face poverty.
And the root cause?
Lack of confidence of the Negro in himself and in his possibilities. A direct result, he says, of the miseducation. A call for deep internal change.
Okay, so if the old system led backwards, as Woodson argues, towards a kind of serfdom, then obviously something new is needed, a different kind of leadership, a different education system altogether.
Right, this is where he shifts from critique to solution, his vision for a new program.
And the foundation for this new program?
It had to be based on a scientific study of the Negro from within, the goal, to develop the power within Black people to do for himself, a total shift towards internal strength.
And that changes the idea of leadership too, doesn't it?
Completely. He says the race needs workers, not leaders. He contrasts that high horse leader, distant and dictatorial, with the true servant of the people.
Someone who lives among the people, thinks with them.
Works for their actual needs, not for personal status. It's about self-reliance because history shows, no matter who's in power, groups that depend solely on others never truly gain rights or privileges.
Self-liberation is the only way.
That's his firm belief. So this new program for education isn't just tweaking things, it's reconstructing the whole system.
Not closing Black colleges, but changing their purpose.
Exactly. Redefining higher education as preparation to think and work out a program to serve the lowly rather than to live as an aristocrat.
And the curriculum, a revolution there too.
Absolutely. Go beyond basics. Study African folklore, the philosophy and proverbs, the works of Negro writers. Reclaim that intellectual heritage. Immerse students in African history, anthropology.
And economics taught differently.
Yes, economics focused on the actual Black experience, the lack of capital, the vital need for cooperative businesses to build shared wealth.
He gives examples of this right education in practice.
Compelling ones, like Dr. DeForest in Japan, who learned the culture first before trying to teach, built trust, or the insurance man in the Philippines who failed with foreign methods.
But succeeded when he used local objects, local heroes.
Exactly. Filled the room with things from their world. Celebrated Jose Rizal, that led to a curriculum for Filipinos, by Filipinos. It shows the power of starting where people are.
Which means a balanced view of history is crucial.
Essential, not ignoring Europe, but giving equal weight to African kingdoms. Songhai, Ethiopia, Egypt's influence on the Mediterranean, and celebrating Black figures in American history who were erased.
The 3,000 soldiers in the Revolution, Phyllis Wheatley, Benjamin Banneker.
Bringing them back into the narrative. True education, Woodson says, opens our eyes to see far ahead. He believed the most inviting field for discovery and invention was the Negro himself, all that untapped potential.
So the focus shifts from imitation to innovation.
Precisely, which connects directly to economic self-sufficiency. Vocational guidance shouldn't just steer people to existing jobs where they'll face discrimination.
It should encourage them
to think and develop something for themselves, create new solutions. He found inspiration in uneducated Black people who succeeded through sheer ingenuity because they weren't limited by the miseducation that taught imitation.
Like Thomas Day, the furniture maker, Henry Boyd and his corded bed.
Yes, people who blended traditions or invented something new, creating successful businesses, employing others. And those stories of the Gordonsville chicken fryer, the sweet potato biscuit baker.
Finding unique methods that brought success because they were original.
Exactly. He points out that even giants like Rockefeller or Ford succeeded by doing something new, not just copying. Originality is key. He also stresses financial discipline-wise use of money, avoiding waste, building for the future.
And that circles back to collective strength again. Cooperation over competition.
Urgently needed. Merging those small, struggling black businesses, banks, insurance, to create stronger institutions that could actually anchor the community instead of fighting each other. Strategic unity.
And underpinning all of this is reclaiming identity, the study of the Negro.
Absolutely fundamental. He tackles the painful truth that educated Negroes often avoided black history, thinking it was unimportant or just full of sorrow.
He saw that avoidance as internalizing the oppressor's view.
A slavish dependence, he called it. That's why he founded the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, to present the facts scientifically, without hate, but with rigor, to counter the lies.
And appreciating the value of color, challenging that internalized shame.
Yes. Emphasizing the beauty, the aesthetic power of blackness itself, pushing back against the imitation of white standards. He even mentions Josephine Baker as someone celebrating black beauty globally.
His core belief, the hidden truth about black contributions, allows oppression to continue.
So learning your own story scientifically builds pride and challenges external control. It allows you to define yourself.
And finally, he champions foresight over just looking back.
Yes, a crucial message for the Lion's Den fam today, too. The need for black communities and nations like Liberia, he mentions, to anticipate challenges, strategize, build internal strength before disaster hits, not just react.
It's a call for proactive self-determination, a complete reorientation of mind, spirit, and action. So as we wrap up this deep dive, wow, it's clear we've really just scratched the surface of Carter G. Woodson's insights and the miseducation of the Negro.
It's such a dense and powerful work.
He just masterfully showed the long-term damage of that miseducational system, not just on minds, but on economics, social structures, politics, the whole fabric of a people.
And his message, nearly a century old, calling for that radical shift, from dependency and imitation to self-knowledge, self-reliance, collective action, it still feels incredibly urgent.
It really does. It leaves us with a tough question, one we should probably all sit with. In what ways, maybe subtle ways, might we in our own lives, our families, our communities, still be operating under some kind of miseducation? You know, assumptions or stories we've inherited that hold us back from our full potential.
They keep us from acting boldly for our own good collectively? That's a heavy question to ponder.
It is, and it resonates with the whole spirit of the Lion's Den fam, right? Thinking critically, building intentionally. Consider Woodson's final challenge. It's like a direct charge to us.
Read it for us.
The Negroes, whether in Africa or America, must be directed toward a serious examination of the fundamentals of education, religion, literature, and philosophy as they have been expounded to him. He must be sufficiently enlightened to determine for himself whether these forces have come into his life to bless him or to bless his oppressor.
Wow. Determine for himself. That's the key.
It is. So for you listening, what concrete steps can you take starting today to really think and do for yourself?
To challenge those old assumptions.
Yeah, and to start building something new, something truly for your community, rooted in self-knowledge, rooted in real liberation.
Because that work of self-education, of true freedom, it's never really finished, is it? It starts with each of us engaging critically right now.